Thank you very, very much. You got Radle right, like a baby cradle. It's Radle. Looking at this audience and knowing so many of you and knowing the tremendous service that so many of you have provided to this city, it leaves me with the question of what can I offer you that perhaps you don't already know or aren't already aware of. And I think what I can offer, especially in the light of Dorothy Day, is to share with you perhaps how I have tried to wear the apron. The title I picked for the talk, The Peace and Power of the Apron, I chose out of my recollection of a picture that I would commonly see of Dorothy Day, and it seemed like she was always wearing an apron. Didn't we have a wonderful smorgasbord of pictures and presentation from Robert Ellsberg last night, all the biography information, and thank you. So that was a delight to see other pictures, but the picture that sticks in my mind is Dorothy with the apron. So I can share with you my own challenges in regards to wearing an apron. You know, many people who wear the apron are providing some kind of service, right? And probably the most common apron we're used to seeing is the waiter at the restaurant. And I think when somebody puts on the apron, consciously or unconsciously, they're declaring a few things. They're declaring, I'm here to serve. They're declaring, I'm expecting things could get dirty. They're declaring that there's something that I don't want to get dirty. And I'm expecting that I'm going to have to pick up some mess. I'm expecting there could be some requests or demands from those I serve. I'm expecting to help someone. And for those who recognize the Christ in others that they serve, you might be conscious to say, I'm expecting engagement with whoever I am serving. As Christians, as persons called to love and do good for others, our apron is Christ. Christ gives us our power to be able to be of service to others. Christ gives us our peace through the service we provide to others. Dorothy put on the apron. Dorothy put on Christ. So to give you a little background from where I speak, I was raised, I guess, as a typical Catholic schoolgirl. You know, dreamed, wonder if I could ever be picked to be the one to put the flowers on the Mary statue in May. Some of you other dreamers are out there. So, but I was raised in a military family. My father was in the Navy, and so we traveled around. I was born in Philadelphia, but learned to walk in Guam, and lived in Spain during some of my middle school years. And so we traveled around a lot, and in high school I was in the D.C. area, and I went to the School of the Holy Child in Potomac, Maryland, Connolly School of the Holy Child. And it was there, I think, the virtues that I witnessed through my parents became very affirmed. The Sisters of the Holy Child Jesus, SHCJ, taught us over and over again about the virtues of simplicity, humility, charity, and joy. And their reflections certainly implanted in my soul, in my consciousness, in my alertness to the message of Christ. And it was there too where I got a taste of being a leader, getting in clubs, and also sometimes having to be a voice that was kind of counter to some of the things that were being said. Got a little taste of that. After high school, I guess maybe because of liking to travel from growing up in a military family, I wanted to go to someplace different in the country, and I looked at San Antonio. I had a brother who was with the Oblates for 13 years, and so I thought, he's in San Antonio. I'll send one of these postcards I saw at this college gathering to Our Lady of the Lake. And I was very pleased to have gotten accepted at Our Lady of the Lake and had a wonderful experience there. And I guess one of the things that I noticed early on, especially being challenged from perhaps some of conservative things I grew up with, that the Sisters of Divine Providence were way more progressive than the students on the campus. And I think that continues today, whether they're 90 or 60, and then unfortunately it doesn't get too real lower than that, but we learned an awful lot by their example. And Sister Jane Ann, is she here now? She continues to set such a wonderful example. Sister Jane Ann, 30 years ago, when our youngest was, when I was pregnant with our youngest, she joined us in a bike ride. I didn't ride, but I went with my husband and some of our other children and many other people, a bike ride from San Antonio up to the Pantex near Amarillo to protest the assembly of nuclear weapons. And so, if that isn't an inspiration and, stepping out on a side that was not popular, I don't know what is. But also it was on Our Lady of the Lake campus that I first heard about Dorothy Day of some significance. I'm sure it must have been mentioned in high school, but somehow it didn't stick. And so it made me alert to the name of Dorothy Day from then on out. In my junior year, I decided finally what I wanted to major in, and I decided to major in theology, but I decided I was going to transfer to Marquette University, and so that's what I did. And when I arrived on campus, one of the first things I noticed were the young men in their Navy ROTC uniforms, and I thought, well, maybe I can be like my sister and find a Navy officer and live that kind of life, and like the life I grew up in. That was the beginning of September. By the end of September, there was an action on campus that had a tremendous effect on my life, and that was the burning of the draft files from the Milwaukee Draft Center. There was a group of 14 men, most of them religious affiliated and some lay people, and they went into, and one was an oblate, Father Larry Rosenbaum, and they went into the draft board. They retained the cleaning woman. Larry was one of those retaining the cleaning woman, got her keys, went into the offices and withdrew all the A1 files, put them in a duffel bag, carried them across the street, set them on fire, and started praying and singing until they were arrested. And so if that wasn't a threat to me as someone who was dreaming of marrying a Navy officer, I don't know what was, but they were there doing that on the basis of their spiritual, their religious beliefs. And I was there studying theology, so it had to make me question. And so when I went home at Christmas and I talked to my brother-in-law, who was working at the Pentagon at the time, and asked his thoughts, he very adamantly told me to stay away from those kooks, those crazy people. And be safe. Don't be hanging out with them. And he had already been through the protests at the Pentagon a few months before. Of course, it was 1968, and height of protests against the Vietnam War. But I came to a conclusion that again influenced my life tremendously, and it was a commitment to pacifism. And that came because with a lot of reflection on what the Milwaukee 14 did and thinking of Christ, I never could clarify in my mind a picture of Christ on one hand saying, love your neighbor, do good to those who hurt you, and on the other hand carrying an M16 rifle. But when I chose pacifism, things, philosophy, theology seemed to have more integrity for me. And so I've chosen, to continue to love the soldier, to not love the soldiering, to not love war, and wherever possible to speak against the war and to speak against that kind of philosophy of solving problems through violence. The other thing with the Milwaukee 14, Larry Rosenbaum and Mike Cullum were working at the Catholic Worker House at that time. And so I got to witness Larry inside the Catholic Worker House visiting there, but I never had a conversation with him. But with Mike Cullum, he started a class in nonviolence. and he was only able to have 2 classes with us before he went through trial and was extradited to go back to Ireland because of what he had done. But in those classes, you know, he spoke about the commitment to nonviolence. He spoke about the commitment to voluntary poverty. He spoke about the idea that if I have 2 jackets and someone's cold, my second jacket is not mine. It belongs to the person without the jacket. Same thing with beds. You know, if I have a lot of beds in my house and there are people without beds, those beds are not mine that are empty. So it was very challenging, but it was a kind of challenge that I loved. And so I made a commitment also to voluntary poverty, to live a lifestyle where you are committed to taking care of those things that you need, but also questioning whether or not you really need something, and trying to live simply. And the biggest challenge I have in living simply right now is the busyness that all of us get into, right? I see the heads going like this. Yeah, you know, you made this commitment to Christ, and geez, where does it end? You know, it doesn't, right? You know, so you wear yourselves out. But I try to remind people, Jesus took the boat out to the sea sometimes, you know, and he went to the desert sometimes. So to live simply, we have to remember to keep that as part of our agenda. So after, I knew that somehow being in Milwaukee and seeing various things that I did, that I was kind of called to be a sponge that year and to take in everything I witnessed. And I knew somehow that my life was going to be very different after that. So after that, I wanted to come back to San Antonio. I had friends here that I loved, and you know, I just loved San Antonio. And I decided I was going to move into a poverty area in San Antonio, be committed to simple living, and work with those, you know, works of mercy and feed the hungry, clothe the naked, all that. And so I from my middle classness, I would ask my friends from San Antonio, I'd say, I want to move into a poverty area, but I want a safe one. And, you know, and so, you know, they would say, well, don't move over near a ghost town, or don't move over near Las Tripas, you know, because, you know, there's gang warfare going on there, or it's just ended. Well, I didn't know San Antonio much beyond a few blocks outside of Our Lady of the Lake University, so I didn't know that the place I chose was right near Ghost Town and right near Las Tripas. And so it was a very big learning curve, but it was not deterred by the challenges or the differences, because as I think probably everybody in this room knows, once you make that commitment, once you respond to a calling, that whatever's in that package of the calling, you just deal with it and you learn about it and you go with it. So, you know, there were some things very practical that I needed to learn. I came in with all my stereotypes about a poverty area. I moved into the area where my mother told me when we lived in D.C., when I was finally driving, she said, you go down in that neighborhood, you don't stop for anything but a stop sign and a stoplight, and you make sure those windows are up and the doors are locked, you know. Well, that's where I live now, is in that area. And so it, you know, there were a lot of lessons learned, and I remember being relieved at one point when I heard in the middle of the night, because I moved in first with my girlfriend from high school, Quinta, and we're sleeping, we're hearing noise at night, and I thought, okay, all right, somebody's trying to break in. But it was a relief to understand the next morning it was just the rats in the wall, you know. So and then another night we heard these voices out on the sidewalk close to the windows of the house. But then we found out it was children at 2 o'clock in the morning, because it's cooler at 2 o'clock in the morning in the summer in San Antonio than it is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So they'd be up playing very, very late. So there, little by little, many stereotypes about living in a poverty area were broken through. And you know what? I met my husband the last month that I was at Marquette, and at the time he was in the seminary. And after I went to San Antonio and he went back to California a while to meditate on whether or not he was thinking of leaving the seminary because he met me or because he really wanted a different pathway, he stayed in the seminary a little longer, and then he decided to join Quinta and I in San Antonio. And so we had the idea of starting a Catholic worker house. But a conversation with Father Ralph Ruiz at the time changed my thinking, or just let things flow in a different direction. First of all, it was hard to find in that immediate neighborhood a house that was appropriate for a Catholic worker house. But the conversation I had with Ralph Ruiz, he was the director of Inner City Apostolate. And I said, you know, I want to know, somebody told me to talk to you, and one of my big questions is, will I, as a white woman, be accepted in this neighborhood that's, 96% Mexican-American? And he said, yes, you just have to be yourself. He said, we know phoniness, so don't pretend you're something you're not, and don't pretend you know something you don't. He said, just come here and live with us. Don't do anything. Don't come in with these ideas. We've seen enough people come in with their big ideas to solve poverty. Just come in and be with us. Again, 3 months. Don't do anything. And maybe after that, you might be able to help somebody sell a few tacos to pay their rent. And so that was what we followed doing. And what we found was happening to us first off was that Father Ralph had found a house for us where some Vista workers had lived before. And as soon as we moved in, these children are knocking on the door asking when we're taking them to the park or when we're taking them on a field trip. Well, a field trip sometimes was to the hardware store to pick up a screwdriver to fix the bathroom door or something like that. But our children in our neighborhood, even today, their whole world very often is just within a few blocks. And so we got very, very involved with children. We got sports programs going. We got arts and crafts going. We got lots of field trips going. And when Father Ralph was leaving the neighborhood, because two things, some political stuff that came up, and also because he was asked to be the first secretary for the Padres organization, he asked if we would finish the incorporation papers for inner city development, which made the organization independent of the church, independent of the city, state, federal. So we did that. We became the volunteer directors of inner city development. And we'd been in the neighborhood since '69. That was '72 when we became directors. And that's what we've been doing since 1972 as volunteer directors of inner city development and continuing to develop a lot of the programs. And I guess it's because of our involvement there that in 2003, when it was questionable what our city council representative was doing and how he was representing us or not being a voice for the poor, that I looked at things and thought, there is no voice for the poor on the city council. So I asked people if they would please consider running, and could not find anybody. And I thought, well, maybe I can do this, So I ran, and I think, again, why did this older white woman get elected in a neighborhood that's, 90 whatever percent Mexican American? I think it was just because of the engagement over the years with the community. So I felt that it was a calling to bring to the council that voice of the poor. And I found that it would come out in small ways and big ways, and it was not just carrying the voice of the poor, but it was also that struggle to maintain your moral commitments, to maintain your ethics, to maintain your values. People will say, what happened to them, after they got elected, where they thought they were somebody of the people. And so I was very conscious of that, and I didn't want to be somebody who compromised values, who compromised ethics, and again, wanted to be that voice for people who weren't having a voice at City Hall. So sometimes it came out in things like this, just to make people aware that there's another aspect to our community than people with money. There was a discussion on the contract for who is going to get the contract for the restaurant at the Tower of the Americas. And the debate was developing, and it's like, well, this company, they're selling their filet mignon at this price, and this one is selling their filet mignon at a little higher price, but they're also offering blah, blah, blah that goes along with it. So I finally punched in to speak. I said, you know, I just need to make a remark. I'm not sure where I fall into this conversation, because the people I represent, most of them can't afford the price to go up the elevator, let alone the price of filet mignon. And for me, a luxury dish is 2 tacos for 99 cents at the Guadalupanita Cafe. And I just thought, somebody needed to kind of put that in perspective. There's somebody else eating in our city besides people who can afford to go up the tower and have a luxurious dinner. Or when the Whitty Museum came before us, and I love the Whitty, but they came before us asking us to raise their prices for admission, which it's one of the things they have to do when they have to get the council's permission. So the person standing before us could not assure me that with raising the price, they were going to maintain free Tuesdays. And I thought, well, free Tuesday is the only way we can guarantee that the people from my community are going to be able to get in the Whitty. And so if you can't guarantee to me that you're going to keep free Tuesday, I'm not going to vote for an increase in admissions. So it was things like that may be small, that bring that consciousness that poverty is a part of our city. And then there were the big things, whether or not to build over the aquifer. Father knows. The struggle of trying to make people understand how important it is to maintain the purity of our water. It was things like housing. Where is the new housing being done? Where is the affordable housing being done? And what about the livable wage? How can we justify, even especially today, what the living wage is? And even those who have raised the livable wage, thank goodness that it's going in that direction, but it's just not good enough. But those are big issues that we always, had to deal with on the city council. One of the really big issues that I felt I was able to make a big impact on was, one, leadership within the district, inviting everybody to be a part of the voice. And I had a monthly council meeting where pretty much anybody could come to the council advisory and give me advice. So again, including people of poverty, businesses, nonprofits, and helping to direct my voice. But also I was asked, another big project was, I was asked by the mayor, at that time Ed Garza, to co-chair the committee the committee for a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And the other co-chair was Julian Castro at the time, who many of you know is our, you know that he's the head of the Department of Housing at this time. Well, I entered and accepted the position with probably a bit of attitude, like, end chronic homelessness, but I think the word chronic, helped me to, accept the situation, to accept the mission. And so we gathered a lot of nonprofits together and asked their advice and got their direction on the 10-year plan. When the 10-year plan was finished, it took about 15 months, and a couple of months later, the council ended up approving it. And then a couple of weeks later, passed some ordinances that I did not vote for that basically criminalized homelessness. Making you're going to get arrested if you're peeing behind the dumpster. You're going to get arrested if you're sleeping in a doorway. 2 weeks before, they had admitted we need to have this plan because we have no place for homeless people to go to the bathroom. We have no place for them to wash up. 2 weeks later, you pass such ordinances. Those ordinances were passed in 2005. It was 2010 before the first people walked through the doors of Haven for Hope. So, I'm glad I was a part of that. Haven for Hope is not a shelter. It has sheltering, but it's a transformation center. And there are people who would say, I first want to say that it's, unfortunately a social worker's paradise. but it's also a paradise for compassion. It's a paradise of opportunity. And there are people who would say, well, you know, you need to follow the Housing First plan, and we should look at that. But if you talk to Chris Plauche, who we're so fortunate directs the Catholic Worker House, she will give you a good idea of what real housing first has to be composed of. It can't just be throwing someone in an apartment or a house. For people who have been on the streets for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, you need to have surrounding services. And so, you know, we have to keep looking at what we do, but I think a very, very big, important element of what we do, whether it's at Haven for Hope, or if it's Joan Cheever offering her gourmet food to homeless on the street, or if it's Catholic Worker, our first element is not housing first, it's not Haven first, it's engagement first. Engagement with the person in need. And I know Ann Helmke is here, and I have to say she is razor sharp on understanding the purpose of engagement, and she's head of our spiritual services at Haven for Hope. And I think it's probably the most valuable thing we do there is just engaging, knowing people, knowing their story. It changes all of us when we do that. At Inner City, we have what I call our Sack Lunch Club. It's pretty much neighborhood homeless people or people in transition who come by, who they may technically be homeless and living under a bridge, but they also might be living in their sister's garage or on their mother's couch. They come by for a sack lunch, but what we do is we make sure that engagement is a very, very important piece of that. So it's a matter of sitting with them, talking with them, knowing their stories. And some of the people who come may come for a sack lunch for 5 years before they walk in the office and say, you know what, I'm ready. Would you take me down to the detox center? I'm ready. But can we hurry? Because I only have about 2 hours before I need another fix. I'm okay, I have my money to get my fix, but I don't want to do that again. Would you take me down, and would you wait with me till they take me in? So it's that building that kind of engagement where someone feels safe enough to tell you that, or to tell you that they've got their stuff on them if they need to take it, and being willing to put them in the car and take them on down to Haven for Hope, or to take them to the detox center, or perhaps to some other service that they're in need of. It's very interesting to see, you know, some of the attitudes that we build as we serve the homeless or serve the most needy in our city. It's incredible, and I mean incredible, like it's hard to believe that as a society we would argue about Joan Cheever's efforts to feed the homeless. Or it's incredible to think that we should have a debate about the efforts of the Catholic Worker to feed the hungry and say they should be going over to Haven for Hope when they're on a different side of town. It's incredible for Haven for Hope to think or expect that they could solve all the problems of all the homeless in the city. It's not reality. And at Haven for Hope, we don't think that we can solve all the problems of all the homeless. So we must glorify and celebrate our partnerships. And in the light of that, it would be incredible if those of us who reach out to the homeless set up any level of competition among each other with the services we provide. You know, we can get territorial like anybody else. These are our homeless. We're serving these people, you know. You know, are we serving, or are we just serving, or are we engaging? And we engage with the issues we've become aware of, all the biggest issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's employment, whether it's housing. That engagement, when you are engaged with that individual, you start to understand the universe of problems. After serving on the city council, I had 3 wonderful years of being out of the fishbowl of public view. And then people started asking me if I would consider running for the school board. And it took a lot of prayer and reflection to decide to do that. But I finally decided that I would do that, and unfortunately got elected. No. But it is a lot of meetings, but I remember one of the reflections that a priest friend gave me was like, you could do a lot on city council. He said, but on the school board, I don't know a place where you can affect more children's lives than on the school board. And that influenced me a lot, and I knew our school board. I serve on the SAISD school board, and I knew at that time the board did not have a good reputation. We're a different board, and we want everybody to know that. We have some new people on our board, and I think we're more mature and doing well. But in that context, too, I have to bring with me the moral ground. I had to bring the ethics. I had to bring my values, and sometimes it can get very challenging there. And I'll tell you this one conflict that I have, because it relates to the commitment to pacifism, but I think it relates to who we are as we put on that apron and who we're serving. So I had this same conflict when I was on council, but it died off quickly. And that's the fact that I choose not to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And, people would want to say that I'm so disrespectful to the veterans and things like that. Well, Roddy Stinson, if you remember him, a writer from the newspaper, used to call me, Patti, I won't say the Pledge of Allegiance, Radle. And then, so when I got on the school board, some people were aware of that, and I was recently elected the president of the school board, but one person decided to make a public point of saying that she couldn't vote for me because I don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. And when we're asked the school children to do that, how could I not do it? So I don't like to grandstand on that issue and make a big public thing about it, but she made a public thing about it, and actually the whole event of confrontation ended up being a good thing, and we're friends. I love her. But it had me give a chance to explain publicly that my not saying a Pledge of Allegiance has nothing to do with the veteran and whether or not I respect him. And my father and two brothers were in the military, and I love them to death. It has to do with where our pledge is. And I insist that the pledge of my life is to the kingdom of God, to the Word of God. And I don't want to accept a position that puts up borders or separates us. So I insist that the kingdom of God has no borders. There are no fences. That the love of God travels everywhere, is everywhere. And so when I don't say the Pledge of Allegiance, it's my very personal action to say, I'm going to insist to myself that I'm going to see beyond all borders. When I pray for the son of my neighbor who's in Afghanistan, I'm also going to pray for the mother of the person that he's fighting against. They both know the suffering. Our understanding of suffering has to be international. Our love has to be international. Christ didn't come for Jerusalem or Bethlehem. He came for all of us. So in the power and peace and the power of the apron, Francis talks about the power of service, and I think that's the kind of power I'm speaking of. It's a matter of realizing, what that apron is. When I say that Christ is our apron, he if we're close to Him, He keeps us close He keeps us out of the way of getting dirty, right? He protects in us what is clean, and as long as we know that Christ is there, Christ is with us, Christ is close to us, it gives us that power to be so accepting of others and to be at peace with what we do, even when it does get challenging. I know the example of Dorothy Day and certainly the power of the apron are what make it possible for me that when Charlie walks into our office smelling like alcohol and urine, that I have the grace to offer him a chair in the office. It gives me the power and the peace to be able to hug the woman that comes in with so many sores. It gives me the strength to be able to have a long conversation with a 27-year-old who's been on drugs since he was 11. It gives me the strength to have a long conversation with the alcoholic who's been using alcohol since he was 17 and is now 51. So that's the power in the apron. That's Christ's power. That's Christ's graciousness. That's Christ's strength. And what would Dorothy be doing today in San Antonio? Perhaps she'd be down at City Hall this week having something to say about the Vista Ridge project. Perhaps she'd be at Commissioner's Court or City Council talking about how we need to raise the livable wage even higher than we have. Perhaps she'd be at the San Antonio Housing Authority saying that we need to stop gentrification when it lowers the inventory of housing we have for the very, very poor. Perhaps she'd be at the border protesting the wall. Perhaps she'd be at the border greeting the immigrants. Perhaps she'd be at the Chancery questioning why we have such nice Catholic schools on the north side while they've closed on the west side. And I'll close with saying, we all love that quote that's been used already. When Dorothy says, "Don't call me a saint, I don't want to be dismissed so easily." A beautiful quote, right? Because we don't want to feel like we're a plaster statue or a holy card or put up on the wall. But I want to say also that I think the word saint for the living is not a title. It's a calling. It's an expectancy. It's a job description, okay? So we need to be willing to admit that we're trying to be saints. And I don't know, did any of you have the elementary school experience where a sister tells you, we're all called to be saints, but then to keep our humility says, a saint with a little s. You heard that phrase? But it told us where we were supposed to be going, what we were striving to do. And I think we have to admit that that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be outstandingly loving people who are trying to do good for others. We need to own it. And I was thinking, with it being Halloween, and I'll end with this thought, isn't it, somebody else can verify, but I think years ago with Halloween, they said kids dressed up like saints and stuff like that. Well, we know what they dress up like now, right? Between vampires and The Walking Dead and Dracula. But, if we, as saints in this room, and this is a wonderful gathering of saints, isn't it? Now, all of you, it's just gorgeous. So can you imagine, though, like The Walking Dead did the other night, walking down the streets of San Antonio, if we were walking down in front of City Hall demanding the livable wage, if we were walking down in front of City Hall demanding better housing, or going to the San Antonio Housing Authority telling them you really, really need to continue keeping care of the very poor, wouldn't we be a difference? Wouldn't we be a little scary? And so maybe the kids would grow up like us as scary people again, grow up like saints, or be saints for Halloween again. So, I don't know. But anyway, I do want to leave with the last impression, I guess, about the idea of that point of engagement, that it's not enough to give a plate of food to somebody, but it's important to know their name, to know who they are, as Dorothy Day did in her engagement, and to truly be with those who are in need and realize we're just like them. We just might not have the same need. Thank you to everyone who had anything to do with putting this conference on. A special thank you to the Oblates. Thank you. Thank you. They wanted me to leave some time for questioning. If there is a question, I'll be glad to take that. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. When you talk about service, I always get stuck on what are my motives for serving. Is this coming from a place of my own ego, my own need to be a good person, to be someone who's been saved? And I think motive, Reverend Rolheiser had spoken about your motivation being the most important thing, and you need to get that straight before you go out and do anything else. And I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Well, I'll tell you why I think that that's a very good question. I think it's a good question because it really puts us at the root of whether or not we're going to be effective. You know, are we doing it for to feel good, like we're fulfilling something that's going to make us feel good, or are we stemming from the love position? And it is very, very important to question ourselves, why are we doing it? The difference between you know, the engagement piece, the real love piece, I would say, is whether or not you're serving food and walking away, you know, or if you're serving food and engaging with that person, and that you are persistent. I think there's a persistence. If it becomes a part of who you are, then I think maybe you can measure, how does that stand up to the other things that you're doing with your life? Does going down and helping with the soup kitchen kind of give you the license to go out and do other things you want to do, to, you know, feel okay about taking a trip to Rome or whatever it might be, where it's something that's far away from the person who's hungry in the street in San Antonio? I just think it's just really important to continue asking that question of ourselves continuously. I think that's kind of my response to the question itself. I hope I've answered that for you. Yes.
Father Ron was talking about the moral loneliness of Dorothy. I would think that in your efforts to the city council and now the school board, that your views may lead you sometime to feel that same way. Could you comment on that?
Yes, that is true. You know, there are times when I know that, okay, I'm the only one thinking this way, this isn't going to go very far. Do I voice it, or do I put that in perspective and have more conversation and grow, hope that people will grow with me in the understanding of a particular issue? Yeah, there is that kind of loneliness. On one of the issues, I mean, this doesn't seem like it's a real big moral issue, but it was one of those issues where I felt like my colleagues were not listening to their constituents. It had to do with the taking the track out of Alamo Stadium. So I stepped out and did my own research and had my own press conference and was there alone, and I was the only one speaking out against the removal of the track. And so, yeah, it was lonely, but I guess it's that loneliness, though, that comes with the companionship and the partnership with Christ, and that makes it possible. So.
Hi.
Yes, hi.
Having come from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where your history, on the plane over, I was reading Father Rosebaugh's book, so that was so ironic, and I named my son after Michael Cullen, so it's, that really resonated with me. But I get nervous when I talk, sorry. I don't really have a question. I just want to say thank you. Your witness is so beautiful, and your life's work is so breathtaking to me, and I just want to thank you for it.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Stand right here or have a seat.
Okay.
With that, it actually, I want to invite Rosalyn Collier to come forward. Not to, there'll be a chance for more conversation and questions, but that kind of is a great segue to what we want to also say to Patti today.
Was that not just absolutely wonderful? We have this treasure in our city of San Antonio. I'd like for all of you to check in your cups for this holy card of Dorothy Day. I want you all to check in your, thank you, thank you. There's a certain resemblance between, Father John was saying back there, there's a certain resemblance between the picture of Dorothy Day and Patti Radle here.
Yes. It's the scraggly hair. I love that this icon has the scraggly hair in it. It's great. That's what we have in common, scraggly hair.
And so when I was asked to present this award, I kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? So I negotiated for 2 minutes instead of the usual 1 minute, John. And what I want to do is I want all of us to present this award to Dorothy Day. On the back of this holy card, we have a prayer that Jesus gave us and Father Ron interpreted for us. And I would be happy if we could all stand up as we are presenting Patti Radle the Social Justice Advocate Award for 2015. If we could read this prayer as our affirmation to her that we are listening to her pleas in this world. The Lord's Prayer for Justice for the Poor. Everybody, our Father, who stands with the weak, who art in heaven, where everything will be reversed, the first will be last, and the last first. Hallowed be thy name. May we always respect that your ways are not our ways. Thy kingdom come. Help us create a world where we do justice, love tenderly, and walk humbly. Thy will be done. Open us that our life might flow through our veins, on earth as it is in heaven. May we act to reflect the graciousness, tenderness, and justice for heaven. Give insight to us that we may see always everything is a gift and share with the poor. Us, the truly plural us, all of us equally, our daily bread, so that every person has what he or she needs and not hoard a surplus. And forgive our trespasses, our blindness to the needs of others, complacency, as we forgive others who trespass against us. Help us to forgive those who victimize us, and lead us not into temptation, to turn away and not see Jesus in our fellow person, but deliver us from evil, that is, from the blindness that lets us continue to participate in anonymous systems with which we do not see who gets less as we get more. Amen. And I present this to Patti Radle, the first honoree.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. And I don't want to stand between you and lunch. I just want to say that my mantra is what I do in community with people. I hang around with good people, and good things happen. Some of the good people are homeless. Some of them are very wealthy. They're all generous of heart. And so I think that's the miracle that has happened in my life, is the gift of being able to hang around good people. And thank you for letting me hang around with you today. Amen. Thank you.
We have one more award to give away. This morning, I'd asked Chris Plauche, the director of Catholic Worker House. Chris, I always pronounce your name wrong. What is it with me and names? Well, come on forward. You can do it yourself. So, Chris, we all love Chris.
Well, just as Dorothy Day was chosen as the paradigm for social justice rooted in a deep spirituality, an incarnational spirituality, and chosen as the topic for the very first Oblate School of Theology Social Justice Conference. And just as we've seen, Patti Radle was the obvious choice for the very first Social Justice Advocate Award for the City of San Antonio. My job is to let you know that our student award is going to seem very obvious to you too. In fact, her name is Katie Ogawa, and I hope I got her name right. And we actually flew her in from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she is a medical student. But she just recently graduated from Trinity University and has a resume that would make all of us people with gray hair very envious. But I was told I only had 3 minutes, so I'm going to stick to the Dorothy Day-ish sort of things. As a high school student, Katie joined a mission group and came to San Antonio and stayed in an inner city church and volunteered her time with organizations that serve the homeless and serve children with disabilities. Catholic Worker was one of them. She was so moved by that, she came back the next year and served in a leadership position for other groups that came in and did the same thing. Then, just before she entered Trinity University, she was the leader for an alternative freshman orientation project where they lived in this church and served people who were homeless and children with disabilities. Then, during her freshman year at Trinity, she conceived of an idea, a new organization called Hope Hall, and convinced Trinity leadership to dedicate a floor of a dorm for students that wanted to live in community, learn about the issues surrounding poverty and homelessness, and dedicate all of their community service hours to such organizations. The first year, I think about 30 students signed up to do that. Second year, 60, third year, 90, and it keeps growing, even when Katie's no longer there, which is a sign, as we heard today, of great leadership. She also got a really prestigious award, probably her most prestigious award up until today. She was chosen as the youth recipient Philanthropist Award by the National Organization of Professional Fundraisers, and brought the audience down with her speech. Wonderful. But it's not really all about her awards that she's racked up, nor is it about what she's done, but it's about how she's done it. And I think that's the way she exemplifies Dorothy Day. Rather than trying to fix people in need and most disenfranchised from the community in a top-down model, she exemplifies a model where she saw all lives as connected, vulnerable, and having equal potential for mutual learning and healing. I think she's an example of engagement, as Patti was talking about. And that's probably the reason why the award that's nearest and dearest to her heart was kind of a simple award given by her peers and her and the faculty at Trinity at graduation, the Kindness Award. And her work continues in Albuquerque as a medical student. Typical of Katie, she's only in medical school less than a year, and she becomes the leader of a student-run clinic that is geared to give free care to those who are homeless and those living in poverty without medical insurance. And then my last little thing is last night when she ran, almost broke her award. Last night when she ran up to me to give me a hug, even though I've known her for 5 years, I didn't recognize her. You see, I know Katie with flowing, long, curly, natural curly hair, and her hair was short, really short. And you probably figured it out already, knowing what you do now about Katie. She not only shaved her own head, but got other girls to shave their hair. And in 2 weeks, raised $30,000 for the Cancer Center in Albuquerque. And so it's a great honor to present this award to Katie Ogawa.
Thank you guys so much. This is such an honor to be here. And when I first found out, I felt so bad. I was like, I'm in Albuquerque. I can't be here. So thank you to whoever made that possible. It really means a lot to me. And just to be back here and see such incredible work continuing to happen. I mean, Hope Hall continuing to happen, and the Dean of Students is here, so thank you. But just the support that San Antonio has and how just you guys as a community have addressed homelessness is really inspiring. And I hope Albuquerque is soon to follow. So thank you.